CO2 is warming the planet. And the equation on CO2 is actually a very straightforward one. If you sum up the CO2 that gets emitted, that leads to a temperature increase. And that temperature increase leads to some very negative effects. The effects on the weather, perhaps worse, the indirect effects in that the natural ecosystems can't adjust to these rapid changes, and so you get ecosystem collapses. Now, the exact amount of how you map from a certain increase in of CO2 to what temperature will be and where the positive feedbacks are, there's some uncertainty there, but not very much. And there's certainly uncertainty about how bad those effects will be, but they will be extremely bad. I asked the top scientists in this several times, do we really have to get down to near zero? Can't we just, cut it in half or a quarter? And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And so that's a big challenge. It's very different than saying, we're a 12-foot high truck trying to get under a 10-foot bridge and we can just sort of squeeze under. This is something that has to get to zero. Now, we put out a lot of carbon dioxide every year, over 26 billion tons. For each American, it's about 20 tons. For people in poor countries, it's less than 1 ton. It's an average about 5 tons for everyone on the planet. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. It's been constantly going up. It's only various economic changes that have even flattened it at all. So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3. We've gone from 26 billion to, at best, maybe 13 billion tons. And that just won't cut it. The microprocessor is a miracle. The personal computer is a miracle. The internet and its services are a miracle. So the people here have participated in the creation of many miracles. Usually we don't have a deadline where you have to get the miracle by a certain date. Usually you just kind of stand by and some come along, some don't. This is a case where we actually have to drive at full speed and get a miracle in a pretty tight timeline. Now I thought, how could I really capture this? Is there some kind of natural illustration, some demonstration that would grab people's imagination here?
Some astonishing images out of Arizona next. Take a look, a massive dust storm blanketing a major American city, Phoenix.
Today, an ominous wall of dust came stalking the entire Phoenix area. A giant brown cloud knocking out electricity to thousands, delaying flights at the airport, creating traffic chaos.
15-passenger van, weather-related crash. The van rolled over.
People caught in the blast, covering their mouths and noses. It's known as a haboob, a freak desert dust storm.
The federal government says the top firefighting priority in the western U.S. right now is the stubborn fire sparked by lightning and burning along the mountains adjacent to Las Vegas, just 25 miles outside of town. The fight has been going on for days. Much of the city has been blanketed in smoke. Now over 1,000 firefighters are on this job.
A typhoon has hit Taiwan's capital, Taipei, killing 1 person and injuring dozens of others. Thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes before Typhoon Sulik hit. Roofs were ripped from homes and some areas were submerged by floodwaters. The typhoon is expected to hit mainland China later tonight.
It's already hit Taiwan, where parts of Taipei were flooded on Saturday. Rescue workers helped residents in some low-lying areas to escape their flooded homes. At least one person's been killed, a police officer hit by a falling brick on his way home from work. Sulik is currently rated a Category 1 typhoon on a scale of 5. It was expected to weaken into a tropical storm over the weekend, according to the Tropical Storm Risk website.
Winds of 118 kilometres an hour generated 10-metre waves and a spectacular display for Yuhan locals brave enough to witness Typhoon Sulik hit the east coast of China. But authorities were taking no chances, evacuating more than 500,000 people ahead of the storm, including thousands of fishing boats. Dozens of high-speed train services have been suspended and flights cancelled, stranding many passengers at terminals as far away as Shanghai. China has been besieged by extreme weather. In the southwest, rescue workers are digging new routes to reach people still trapped by week-long storms that have killed more than 80 people.
A column of ash reaching more than 5 kilometers into the sky after increased activity in the Tungurahua volcano. Ecuadorian authorities say an explosion in the volcano on Sunday could be felt hundreds of kilometers away. The dust visible well over 100 kilometers away in the capital, Quito. Authorities declared an orange alert, the second highest warning level, and said that more than 200 people had been evacuated from the locality.
Our focus shifts now due to the fact that weather is making news tonight. Yes, it's summer, and yes, across this country, it's supposed to be hot in a lot of places right about now, but forecasters are warning about a dangerous and oppressive heat wave hitting a big part of the country, one of the more sustained we've seen in several years.
Brian, the temperatures are in the mid-90s here in Midtown, but it's felt as hot as 102 degrees in New York City today because of the humidity. These temperatures are not unusual for 1 or 2 days, but to have a stretch of what we're expecting is unusual. At least 6, maybe 7 days of this heat will continue into the early part of the weekend.
Most of the country, 43 states are in the 90s this week. 13 states have issued heat advisories or warnings, with heat indices approaching 105 in some areas.
Thanks for joining us. We begin this hour in China, where torrential rainstorms have battered large parts of the country. Thousands of people have had to evacuate their homes, and the government says at least 295 people are either dead or missing.
More rain is expected to hit large parts of China, according to China Meteorological Administration. Provinces of Gansu, Shanxi, Sichuan, Henan, and Guangdong will see heavy or torrential rain for 24 hours from Wednesday morning.
In Jiangyo City, workers are still repairing the La Qinglian Bridge, which collapsed last week and killed 12 people.
Hundreds of dead fish have been washing up on the beaches of the Mississippi Gulf Coast for the past 2 days. Mississippi officials want you to be aware, but not afraid.
Stingrays, fish, shrimp, eels, and crabs, all dead, all spread along beaches along the Mississippi Gulf Coast Tuesday. Officials say it's the second day of a fish kill for the record book.
En montagne, on est encordé le risque est le même pour toi que pour moi. On sait que le réchauffement, il va aller de plus en plus vite. Donc la situation va être de plus en plus grave pour tout le monde, pour tout le monde.
And we could see more superstorms like Sandy, along with massive wildfires, epic flooding, and drought. A new report says they could be worse than anything we've faced in 500 years. The World Meteorological Association says the last decade was the warmest ever. We saw new heat records on land and at sea. Plus, it was the wettest period in a century, with more floods and hurricanes. Professor Michio Kaku is a physicist at the City University of New York and a CBS This Morning contributor. Professor, good morning.
Morning.
How significant is this report?
This report is devastating. You know, you don't need a weatherman to know that something is terribly wrong with the weather. Everywhere I go, people say the weather's out of control. 100-year flooding, 100-year heat waves, especially in Europe, 100-year storms. And this report summarizes it all. The last decade has gone down as the hottest decade ever recorded in the history of science.
And it is global warming. For the first time, scientists confirm the link between climate change and our awful weather.
Emergency services scramble to Bedford's swollen. As the floodwaters finally worked their way along the Great Ouse, other parts of Bedfordshire didn't escape either.
We've lived up here for over 40 years, and we've never, ever had anything like this.
80,000 fatalities in Burma today after Cyclone Nergis.
Drought emergency across Western Europe, with drinking water strictly rationed in Holland, France.
Forest fires which are still sweeping across Spain.
£20 billion, price worth paying for motorists' right to drive, said Lord Clarkson of Silverstone. Good news for the UK wine industry, especially...
The latest is that New Orleans will not be rebuilt a third time, said the Louisiana
Less than the total destruction of India's dams would end Pakistan's drinking water crisis.
As US President Chelsea Clinton refuses Africa's demand.
Sales of air conditioning units in India.
Thousands as San Francisco's extraordinary heat wave continues into Los Angeles.
Now we're seeing extreme weather events somewhere on the planet every single day.
Estimated 35 million Chinese refugees.
Skiing in the Alps is over.
The new Channel 4 documentary asks, is global warming really happening, or are natural...
It's 51 degrees centigrade, the highest land temperature.
More than 100 million people are homeless tonight as
Massive
Bangladesh...
methane emissions from Siberia.
The last Indonesian tree fell, but biofuel prices are...
The European Union today permanently closed all of its borders.
And roadside verges must be reserved for food production.
London is underwater again as last night's 30-foot storm surge overcame the Thames barrier.
New Zealand has also now closed its borders, leaving 22 million Australians.
Reports are coming in that the North Sea is boiling.
100 million refugees from Middle East and continental Europe are all heading north.
Species are now extinct, scientists estimate, and ecosystems are collapsing across the planet.
We have passed 2 degrees. We cannot now stop runaway climate change.
There are simply too many people to feed in Ireland's remaining farmland.
Suicide rates increasing 800%. The Amazon rainforest is still burning.
And anyone who cannot bear to eat their own cats and dogs.
Entering the 8th world food crisis.
World temperatures today passing 4 degrees.
Pakistan has launched retaliatory nuclear strike onto Delhi.
A war of biblical ferocity across the entire continent.
We wouldn't be the first life form to wipe itself out. But what would be unique about us is that we did it knowingly. Now, what does that say about us? The question I've been asking is, why didn't we save ourselves when we had the chance? Is the answer because, on some level, we weren't sure if we were worth saving?
You know, if all of us stood united in terms of the world, it would be very different in every way. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. If we can't even stand united on eradicating poverty in the world, what does the health of the planet have any chance?
Je pense que toutes les personnes en l'avenir, ils nous feront aussi peut-être le reproche de ne pas avoir pensé à préserver toute cette nature. On a su en profiter, mais on n'a pas su préserver.
I just find it surprising that after so much effort, the final act of our existence should be suicide. So why did I build this archive? It's a cautionary tale. Not for us. Too late for us. But for, well, for whoever, whatever, eventually finds this recording. And away you go.